everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am here to kind of chat you through some of the books that I read in March and basically just have a little bit of a reading catch up because, as you probably will have seen, I took about 2 weeks off of filming videos, which meant that I didn't end up doing any of my March wrap-ups. So I have been denying you bookish content. How bad of me. During March it didn't really feel like I was denying you much because I didn't really feel like I was reading much, and I didn't feel like I had really much to say on the books that I was reading, aside from Les Mis, which, as you probably will know from all of my vlogs about Les Mis, I always have a lot to say about it. And I will also apologise because I don't have copies of a few of the books that I read before I moved out. I basically made the decision to only bring TBR books with me because if I tried to make decisions on books that I had read and which book deserves to come down with me, which books deserve to move with me, like, we could have been there a while and then I would have ended up taking everything down, and I don't know if you can tell, but there isn't room for that. I really don't have the bookshelf space for that. So decisions had to be made and I had to prioritise unread books over read books. But I did kind of feel like prior to me moving, the books that I read aside from Les Mis were just kind of nondescript to me. I didn't have much to say about them, which I felt would make for a really weedy wrap-up, so I just didn't end up doing it. I read Troy by Stephen Fry, which, you know, in a lot of ways was quite a highlight. I do always enjoy Stephen Fry's Greek myth retellings. However, this was the first one where I didn't have any of the audiobook to listen to. Usually when I read these Greek myth retellings by Stephen Fry, I listen partially to it on audiobook and partially read it physically on the page. And this time I didn't have access to an audiobook, and I really felt the lack of that. I really feel like the audiobook propels my reading, and I love having Stephen Fry's voice in my head. Not to say that his narrative style written on the page isn't very strong, because it is, but I missed it. I think some books do just generally work a little bit better as audiobooks than they do as physical reading books, if that makes sense. So I do at some point really want to find the audiobook if I can get it, but I feel like the comments that I've made previously about Stephen Fry holds true in this book. It's very funny, it's very colloquial, which for some people they're not gonna like. It's very jokey, and some people are just not gonna like that. They're not gonna like a modern reimagining of the Greek myths with modern language, with slang that is not of the time period. For myself, I really enjoy it. I think it really brings it down to earth and really brings out the humour, and I think anything that makes classics, that makes history more accessible to readers is a good thing. I also read Shuggie, Bain by Stuart this month, and I feel like this is one of those books that is like a great book, yes, but is not really for me. I could definitely see why this won the Booker Prize, and I definitely can see why so many people liked it, but for me, I just kind of felt miserable every time that I had to pick it up, which is kind of the intention. It's a very miserable story in many ways, but I got to the point with this because it is so gloomy that I was kind of going every time that I had to pick it up because I just didn't want to go back to it. And I don't think that's because it's a bad book at all. I think it's a very good book. It may just have been the time that I read it, I don't know, but yeah, Shuggie, Bain, great for other people, just not my personal fave. I also really randomly read this book that was all about art. It was something like the 100 greatest paintings ever painted, and I only picked it up because I found it in a lending library really close to my house. You know, those little libraries that people build and set up outside of their houses. Yeah, I basically gave some books to the lending library and then took a couple for myself, and this was one that just kind of intrigued me. Because truth be told, I don't really know much about art from any century. You know, I like going to art galleries, I like going to museums, but I'm not somebody who really studies the art when I'm there. I'm just kind of looking around like, this is nice. You know, the people who go to art galleries and they're just mesmerised and they stay by one painting for hours dissecting it, and I'm just like, okay. You know, just analysing the brushwork. It kind of reminds me of whenever I go to see shows with one of my friends who's a dancer and she's always pointing out the footwork, and I'm just like, I don't know anything about dancing, but that's nice. I'm just kind of there like, this is pretty. And I've always felt like I should know more than I actually do. So yeah, I read this and it had all the greatest hits from painting from like the year 1300 to now. I say now, but it was a book that was published in 1989, I think, so obviously not 21st century. And yeah, don't really have much to say about it. It was nice. Maybe it might unleash an interest in art that I've never had before. And then of course the big book that you've probably all been expecting that I finished in March was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I'd been reading this alongside Kieran at KD Books and a bunch of people on our Les Mis Discord server. And I mean, you could probably see it coming considering how much I talk about Les Mis, but guys, I just love this book so much. I don't want to talk too long about it because obviously I have done many an hour talking about this book and I have bored so many people talking about Les Mis, but I do think it really holds up. I'm so glad that I read it for a second time. This reread has definitely cemented it for me as one of my favourite books of all time, and I feel like it hits differently every time you read it. Because it is such a long sprawling book with so many characters, I feel like there's always something in it each time you read it that you didn't see before. A perspective that maybe you didn't care about so much the first time but really lands for you the second. second. For me, I feel like that was really Jean Valjean's story. You know, he is the main character of Flamers, but I feel like I've always just kind of been like, okay, he is the main character, but I care more about these other people. Whereas I found his story so affecting this time round. And the ways that Jean Valjean never feels like he's good enough, never feels like he's really a good person and deserving of any sort of love or attention. And I was just there like, oh, it's okay, Jean Valjean, I'll give you a hug. Something that you'll definitely know from watching my vlogs is the ways in which Victor Hugo deals with names and identity, the different names that people have for themselves, the nicknames that other people give them, and how respect is correlated to you using a name that somebody wants to be called rather than you asserting your own name on them. And that theme of names and the names that people have for themselves and for other people is so strong in Les Mis. It is everywhere. And I don't know how that never landed for me before, because pretty much every single character in this book goes by a different name at some point through the story. Pretty much every character in this book disguises themselves or hides their identity at some point through the story. And I feel like Les Mis gets a really bad rap for being like a really sad book. You know, this miserable book where everybody dies. And honestly, I don't think it's as sad and tragic as so many people paint it. Like, sad things happen, but for me, I just find it very hopeful in many ways. Like, yes, there are a lot of deaths in Les Mis and it is very sad at points, but I feel like there's also so much hope within that book, and I don't think that's spoken about enough. I'm just going to cut myself off here from talking about it because I could talk about this book forever, and I do hope that maybe my read along has encouraged some of you to pick it up at some point in your life. I really think it's worth giving it a try at least. And those 3 books were basically all that I read before I moved. Obviously Les Mis was quite a big task and I was really heavily focused on finishing that rather than picking up anything new, because I didn't want to have to lug down this massive chunk of a book because I had like 100 pages left to read. I would have been really annoyed with myself, but it had felt like I hadn't been particularly productive with my reading. So basically when I settled myself down in my room, I decided to read short books, and that made me feel like I was a little bit productive. And especially because I wanted to make a head start on some of the books that people had got me for my birthday, I'm so appreciative of these books and I wanted to make progress now. So first off, we have this little picture book, Little People Big Dreams of Audrey Hepburn. This basically is an illustrated biography for children of Audrey Hepburn and her life, and it's just really pretty and a really great way of introducing children to different famous figures. And what I really like about this is that this focuses much less on Audrey Hepburn's acting life and much more on her humanitarian work, and how she prized her charitable work much more than she did her acting career and her fame, which I think is a really nice message to send to children. I think is something that is often ignored about Audrey Hepburn, even though that's what she cared the most about in life. The impression I always get from Audrey Hepburn is that she didn't really care about being famous. In fact, she found it a hindrance a lot of the time, aside from the fact that it did allow her to raise awareness for these different causes and for the ways that different people were suffering because of the fact that she'd suffered herself so much as a child. I really enjoyed this. I'm very appreciative of my sister for picking this up for me because I've been wanting this for a very long time, so thank you very much. Another illustrated book that I picked up at the end of the month was Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, an Introvert story by Debbie Tung, which was sent to me by Marina Reads. And this was such a lovely little book. Basically Debbie Tung's little comic strips about what it is like to be an introvert in a world that can't stop talking, which I'm pretty sure is the name of Susan Cain's book. And as an introvert myself, I could definitely relate to a lot of this, feeling a lot of times like people do not understand your need to be on your own and to recharge your batteries, and the fact that a lot of the time I do like socializing with people, especially people I'm really close to, but like I need my time on my own. I can't be doing a billion parties in 1 week. No, no, no. And I felt unlike Book Love, which is another one of her books that I'd read before, this got a lot darker than that book had. It doesn't shy away from talking about slightly darker sides of being an introvert, particularly if you were an introvert with anxiety, social anxiety around not being good enough. It also included a really lovely story about her meeting her husband and how even though he's very much an extrovert, he really respects her boundaries, and how he often kind of brings her out of her shell and will always look after her during party situations. He's kind of the extrovert that will talk to everybody, which makes her feel more comfortable. And I just thought that was so lovely. So yeah, definitely recommend this one. I also read Off the Shelf, a celebration of bookshops in verse, which is a poetry collection edited by Caroline Duffy and is basically lots of different poets writing about the joys of bookshops. This was sent to me by Shah over at Thoroughly Enjoyed Books, and you can see I definitely tabbed quite a few poems in here, and I generally love a book about books and bookshops, so this was definitely a win for me. However, I will just generally say, like, it's an anthology of lots of different poets, so not all of the poems in here were for me. They're not going to be for everybody, especially because this consists mainly of modern poets. A lot of whom use free verse, which I am not. It's not even really that I'm not a fan of free verse, I just don't get it. I'm much more of a fan of traditional rhyme and meter with my poems. Like, I like a good rhyme. Why don't poets rhyme anymore? I love a rhyme. But whilst not every poem in here was 5 out of 5 for me, I definitely felt like nostalgia and really wanted to get back into a bookshop, guys. I can't wait until we can go back to bookshops. So thank you very much, Shaun, for this. And then finally, on the bookshop theme, we have 7 Kinds of People You Find in Bookshops by Shaun Blythell, which was sent to me from Shannon over at 155 Books. Shaun Blythell is probably most well known for his book, The Diary of a Bookseller, which came out a couple of years ago. And this basically is his dissection of the 7 kinds of people that you find in bookshops, and then kind of the subcategories of each of those 7 types. The 7 types that he identifies are the expert, the young family, the occultist, the loiterer, the bearded pensioner, the not-so-silent traveller, and the family historian. And then he has a bonus round of the 8th kind of person you can meet in a bookshop, which is staff, of course. And I just found this so delightful. I had read The Diary of a Bookseller before, and I do definitely think it's worth checking out, but I feel like I much preferred this to that book. But because The Diary of a Bookseller was his diary, and it was basically all of the mundanities of running a bookshop, there were definitely times where that book dragged a bit. Whereas this, by design, has so much more of the humour, and it's there on every single page in a way that it just wasn't in Diary of a Bookseller. I feel like if you had read Diary of a Bookseller and found it kind of dry and a little bit boring in parts, then definitely give this a go. This will give you all of the witty humour. I really did enjoy reading this. Definitely picked up the end of my reading month. The one little negative point that I did notice in here that just might be my sense of humour not aligning with Shaun's. I don't know, but like a recurring gag that he often came back to was the idea of women having facial hair and that being not very attractive. I don't know, it just felt a little bit to me. He'll often talk about men having like facial hair that he finds distasteful, and then it will very quickly lead on to, and women as well, ha ha ha, and the whole punchline is women having facial hair. Oh, unsightly. I don't know, maybe I'm just being a little bit sensitive about it, but it happened a couple of times in this book where he would kind of like pick on people's appearances. And I don't know, I just generally don't find picking on people's appearances really funny. There's so much that you can talk about in terms of like bookshop customers' behaviour that I don't think that talking about their appearances and why you find that distasteful is needed. But aside from that, I did find it generally really funny. So yes, that was the end of my little March wrap-up little book reading catch-up video. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I read this month and any other books that you read and enjoyed. I'd love to hear about them. Apologies that it has taken so long for me to get back up and filming videos. I just felt like whilst I was in the real thick of moving that I just couldn't, I didn't have the energy to film. But this is now the 2nd video that I've filmed in here, and hopefully there'll be plenty more to come. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.